Hello students, welcome to our new chapter that is on the transmission of the 2 and 3 wheelers. Right, until now we have seen engine and other components of the vehicle. Now we will see how the power of the engine is being transmitted towards our wheels. Right, for that we require some of the transmission components in the vehicle so that we can transmit the power according to our requirement. The power which is being developed by the engine needs to be transferred to our wheels according to the required speed and required torque. For that we provide two main components. First one is the clutch and second one is the gearbox. Now as we know that clutch is used to engage and disengage the transmission system from the engine whenever it is required. And gearbox is used to divide our power into the speed and the torque division according to the requirement. Right, almost the components that we are going to see, we have already learned about the four-wheeler transmission system. The components will almost be similar, such as the types of the clutch, the types of the gearbox. All these things we have already learned about in the subject that was basics of automotive system. But again we will revise all those components and how they are being used in the case of the two-wheelers that we will see in this chapter. So let's start this chapter. The first thing that needs to be seen is the layout of the transmission system. Right now you can see the layout of the transmission system, which is generally used in case of the motorcycle. In the case of the motorcycle, if you can see the layout in that, you can see that from the clutch side, that is the leftmost part, that is the multiplate clutch which is been connected with our engine crankshaft. For that, one gear assembly has been provided between clutch and crankshaft. That is our primary drive, and first speed reduction is done at that primary drive. From that clutch, the power is transmitted to our gearbox, and gearbox further is connected with our final drive, which will further transmit the power to our wheels and tires. So this is simply how the power is transmitted from the engine to the primary drive, which is the gear drive in this case. From that the clutch, and from the clutch the power is further transmitted to our gearbox. Right, in this case you can see that the gearbox which is used is a type of a sequential type gearbox or a manual gearbox. Right, in the case of the Activa and Jupiter, the gearbox will not be there. In place of that, CVT will be used, that is continuously variable transmission. Right, the CVT is used whenever we want to make our vehicle an automatic transmitted vehicle. In the case of the cars which is being driven by the automatic transmission, there also we are using the CVT method. Let's see one brief layout of the transmission system which is generally used in case of the motorcycle. So you can see from the engine the power is transmitted by a primary drive. By the help of the primary drive, the first speed reduction is done. With the help of primary drive, we have connected our multiplate clutch, which is generally used in case of the motorcycles. With the help of multiplate clutch, we have connected our gearbox. With the gearbox, we have connected our final drive, which is an chain and sprocket arrangement in case of a motorcycle. Right, you can see the chain drive is employed in case of the motorcycle to transmit the power of the gearbox to our rear wheel, and from that rear wheel the vehicle will be driven. Second is the layout of the transmission system in case of the automatic transmitted vehicle such as Activa. So in that case you can see the power is being generated with the help of the CVT, right, continuously variable transmission. With the help of the engine, we have connected a primary drive. That primary drive is further connected with our CVT. The CVT has two pulleys which is connected with our belt drive, and that power is further transmitted to the rear wheel of the vehicle. So this is a simply arrangement in which the gearbox is replaced with a CVT. Also, in the place of the multi-plate clutch, here we will use an centrifugal clutch, which is an automatically working clutch which will depend on the speed of the engine. The more the speed of the engine, the clutch will be engaged. If the speed of the engine is lower, which is at the idle condition, the clutch will not be engaged. All those components will be learned in the detail in the further videos. Next thing is the types of the primary reduction, or we can say the primary drive. Which type of primary drives can we use in case of the motorcycle? The first one is the belt drive. We can either use the belt drive to transmit the power from the engine to the clutch. Either we can use the chain drive to transmit the power from the engine to the clutch, but chain drive is generally used for the final drive in place of the primary drive, right? The best possible solution for the primary drive can be the gear drive, right? As we saw in the video that was earlier, that motorcycle, in case of the motorcycle, 2-gear pair was given for the primary reduction or the primary drive of the engine. That the reason for providing primary drive is that the RPM which is being generated by the engine is very much higher. So that RPM needs to be reduced before transmitting it further into the transmission system. So that RPM or that reduction is being obtained by the help of the primary drive or primary reduction. For that, mostly we use the gear drive that you can see on the screen, that the 2-gear pair is connected with our multi-plate clutch, and further the power is being transmitted with the help of the transmission system, or we can say with the help of the gearbox. Now let's see about the components of the transmission system, and the first component will be the clutch, which is connected with our primary drive. The main function of the clutch is to engage and disengage our engine with the gearbox. Whenever we want to shift the engine, the clutch needs to be disengaged so that the gear can be easily shifted. What are the requirements of the clutch? So the first requirement of the clutch is the torque transmission. The torque which is being generated by the engine should be transmitted by the clutch, otherwise the vehicle will not be easily moving. For example, whenever we start our vehicle, we require maximum torque that is being generated by the vehicle, so only after the resistance can be overcome and the vehicle can be moved ahead if the torque is sufficient. The second is the engagement of the clutch. Whenever we engage the clutch, the power is transmitted via gearbox and further to the transmission system. So engagement of the clutch should be proper, and there should be minimum amount of the slip between the clutch. Slip means the loss which occurs between the engine and the gearbox because of the clutch. The clutch needs to transmit more than 95 or 99% power that is being generated by the engine to the gearbox, so that proper engagement of the clutch is necessary. Next thing is the heat dissipation. Right, now clutch is an friction material, right? 2 friction materials are used, and clutch works on the principle of the friction. 2 materials friction with each other, and because of that friction the heat will be generated. So if the heat is not being dissipated into the atmosphere, the material of the clutch can expand, or the properties of the material of that clutch plate can change. If that properties change, then the friction that needs to be obtained will be reduced. So the heat should be dissipated easily into the atmosphere. For that, proper holes is being drilled on the clutch plate or on the pressure plate, so that the heat can be easily dissipated. Next thing is the dynamic balance. The balance of the clutch should be proper, because the input shaft and output shaft both should be balanced. Otherwise, the power which is being transmitted towards the gearbox will not be sufficient for the vehicle to be run, or the torque that needs to be developed will not be developed if the dynamic balance is not created in the clutch. Next is the vibrations. The vibrations which are being generated in the clutch should be minimal. Right, the minimum amount of the vibration should be created in the engine, and that vibration should be damped with the help of the springs which are provided in the clutch. Next is the size. The size of the clutch is main important because of the two-wheeler assembly. Right, in case of the two-wheeler, the space is very less, so the clutch should not occupy too much of the space, and because of that, the size of the clutch should be lower. So in the four-wheeler we use single plate clutch, but in case of the two-wheelers we use the multi-plate clutch, because multi-plate clutch reduces its diameter because number of clutch is more compared to the single plate clutch. So we require smaller size of the clutch for the same amount of the power transmission. So multi-plate clutch saves the space in case of the two-wheeler, and that is the main reason for using the multi-plate clutch in the case of the two-wheelers. Next is the inertia. The inertia of the clutch is very important because of the mass that is being generated in the clutch, and that inertia should be at the proper level. And the last one is the ease of operation. Whenever we are operating the clutch with the help of either clutch lever or with any other arrangement in case of the two-wheelers, then that clutch should be easily operated with the help of hand. Not too much of the power should be required to operate the clutch in case of the clutch assembly in case of the two-wheelers, so that the driver does not feel fatigue in case of the two-wheelers, and the gear shifting becomes a pretty easier method in case of the clutch for the two-wheelers. So these are the basic requirements of the clutch whenever we want to use any clutch in the case of the two-wheelers. So this requirement should be fulfilled whenever we are selecting the clutch. So in this video we saw about the transmission layout and the requirements of the clutch. In the next video we will see about the different types of clutch which is being used in the case of the two-wheelers. Until then, thank you so much.